the cruel performance that became the tragic end for the visitors of the horror festival. The film opens with a man named John driving a truck down a deserted road. In the middle of his journey, John is startled when he sees a woman named Lindsay covered in blood, screaming for help. Lindsay, who looks terrified and desperate, feels relieved when she sees the truck approaching. Without thinking twice, she climbs into the truck and begs John to give her a ride. John is initially confused by Lindsay's condition, and Lindsay hurriedly explains that someone tried to kill her, but she managed to escape after a struggle. John doesn't immediately believe her story, but suddenly a large man wearing a mask and holding an axe smashes through the truck window. Shocked, John slams the gas pedal and rushes Lindsay to a doctor to get medical treatment. After being unconscious for several hours due to her injuries, Lindsay finally wakes up. However, her eyes are still covered with bandages, so she can't see her surroundings. In her confusion, Lindsay hears the voice of a man who turns out to be Dr. Tomey, the doctor taking care of her. Dr. Tomey calmly explains Lindsay's condition and asks her to tell him what happened. Though still weak, Lindsay tries to recall and recounts that terrifying night. At that time, Lindsay was with her boyfriend, Sean, and two friends, Ryder and Lance, planning to spend their vacation at a cabin located in Goreville. During the trip, the car Sean was driving almost ran out of gas, so they stopped at a gas station to fill up the tank. While Sean was refueling, Ryder and Lance decided to go inside the store to buy some snacks. When they entered, Ryder and Lance felt something strange because the store looked empty and there was no clerk in sight. Lance began to walk around hoping to find someone. Eventually, he reached a room filled with videotapes. Strangely, each tape was labeled with different dates, months, and years. Lance felt increasingly confused as he tried to understand why the tapes were labeled in such detail. Suddenly, the store clerk, let's call him Michael, appeared and caught Lance snooping in his private room. Michael was furious seeing Lance boldly entering his private space without permission. With a piercing glare, Michael demanded to know what Lance was doing there. Feeling cornered, Lance nervously replied that he was just curious because no one seemed to be in the store. Michael, who had never seen them in the area before, began to ask where they came from. Lance answered that he and his friends were from Nashville and that they had come to spend their vacation at a cabin and enjoy the fall season. Hearing that, Michael suggested they visit a festival called Talon Falls Scream Park, where there would be plenty of fun and thrilling attractions to make their vacation more exciting. However, he warned them that they'd need strong nerves to go there, as many jump scares awaited. While Lance and Michael were chatting, Sean arrived and urged them to hurry up so they could continue their trip. Lance thanked Michael for his recommendation, then they got back into the car and left the store. Inside the car, Lance suggested that instead of going to the cabin as originally planned, they should change their destination to Talon Falls Scream Park as Michael had recommended. Sean and Ryder were immediately intrigued by the idea, but Lindsay wasn't as enthusiastic. She felt uneasy about the frightening atmosphere they might encounter at such a festival. After some discussion and reassurance from the others that Talon Falls Scream Park was just a horror-themed entertainment event, Lindsay finally agreed to join them. The trip to the festival took several hours, and by the time they arrived, night had fallen. After the long drive, they finally reached Talon Falls Scream Park. The atmosphere was far different from what they expected. The parking lot was packed with cars and the area buzzed with excited visitors. Because of the massive crowd, the line to enter the horror festival was extremely long, and they had to wait for hours before they could get in.
I don't know, dude. You can hang out here with us if you want.
Yeah.
While waiting, they heard screams coming from inside the festival, which only made them more curious to see what was happening. As they stood in the long queue, a man they didn't know suddenly approached them. With a mysterious smile, he offered them free VVIP tickets that would allow them to skip the long line and enter directly. Without hesitation, Lindsay, Sean, Ryder, and Lance accepted the offer, feeling lucky even though they found the man's generosity a bit suspicious. With the VVIP wristbands secured, they headed straight for the special entrance guarded by security. Once their tickets were checked, they were allowed inside. As soon as they entered, they were greeted by a tense atmosphere filled with endless jump scares. Though a bit frightened, their curiosity and excitement pushed them to explore further. The festival turned out to be far scarier and more intense than they had imagined. They encountered various horrifying attractions, such as dark corridors filled with eerie noises and fast-moving shadows. The tension grew even stronger when they stumbled upon a scene that looked disturbingly real. A man imprisoned, strapped to an electric chair, being tortured in a gruesome way. His body was covered in burns, making the spectacle feel horrifyingly authentic. The group stopped for a moment, shocked and uneasy, their skin crawling at the sight. Yet the four of them tried to laugh it off, convincing themselves that it was all just part of the show. As Lance looked around the prison area that was part of the attraction, he noticed a single lever that stood out among the props. His curiosity got the better of him, and despite some hesitation, he couldn't resist pulling it to see what would happen. The moment he pulled the lever, the man strapped to the electric chair began convulsing violently, screaming in agony as if he were truly being electrocuted. He begged Lance to stop, his voice filled with pain and terror, pleading for mercy. The atmosphere instantly grew tenser. Lindsay, Sean, and Ryder, who had initially been amused, now looked anxious and unsettled. The man's expression was too convincing. It was hard to tell whether it was real or just part of the act. Even though they knew the festival was supposed to be a horror attraction, the scene felt disturbingly real. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, they decided to leave the area. As they walked toward the next section, they discussed what had just happened. Lance tried to convince the others that it was just an incredibly well-done performance, while Lindsay started to feel that something was seriously wrong with the place. Suddenly, they found themselves trapped between two heavy metal doors that slammed shut, locking them in a narrow corridor. There was no way out, and the only thing visible was a CCTV camera mounted in the corner, recording their every move. Panic set in as they waved frantically at the camera, hoping someone would notice and help, but no response came. After several tense minutes, one of the doors slowly opened, revealing a room beyond. Inside, a woman was tied to a chair, struggling and screaming for help with terror in her eyes. Then, a masked man appeared in the room. Without hesitation, he began torturing the woman, ripping out her toenails one by one in a horrifyingly brutal act. Lindsay couldn't bear to watch, while Sean and Ryder stood frozen in disbelief, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Lance kept insisting it had to be just another realistic act, trying to calm both himself and the others. Then the other metal door opened, giving them a chance to leave. Overwhelmed and frightened, Lindsay and Sean decided to find a way out of the festival. However, instead of following them, Lance convinced Ryder to go somewhere secluded with him, intending to make love. Because of Lance's impulsive decision, they became separated from Lindsay and Sean. As Lance and Ryder were about to be intimate, they heard a noise coming from a dark corner of the room. Curious, Lance decided to check it out. When he investigated, he was stunned to discover a hidden control room filled with surveillance monitors. Each screen displayed different angles of the festival grounds, showing various visitors experiencing the same fear and horror that they had. The room was also littered with videotapes scattered across the desks, each labeled with specific dates, months, and years. Lance immediately remembered the collection of tapes he had seen earlier at the store. Confused and disturbed, he tried to piece together what those recordings meant and what was truly happening in this place. While monitoring the CCTV screens, Lance's eyes suddenly focused on one of the monitors, showing Lindsay and Sean desperately searching for a way out of the festival. His anxiety spiked when he saw a large man appear behind them. Without warning, the man swung a massive hammer, striking Lindsay and Sean, knocking them unconscious instantly. As Lance stared at the screen in shock, he failed to notice danger creeping up behind him. In a split second, a man appeared from the shadows and injected him with a sedative, knocking him out cold. Ryder, too, was ambushed and drugged by the same group. Later, Lindsay, Sean, and Ryder woke up locked inside a prison cell. Every exit had been tightly secured, and a vicious guard dog stood watch in front of them.
Who's this guy?
Ryder, panicking, began worrying about Lance's whereabouts, realizing he wasn't with them. She assumed Lance had been taken somewhere else, likely to a more dangerous place because he had dared to enter a restricted area. Inside the cell, Lindsay, Sean, and Ryder met another captive named Greg, who was trapped under the same circumstances. Greg told them his story, how he had been captured and separated from his friends while at the festival. Since his capture, he had tried numerous ways to escape, but failed every time because the guard dog was always alert, ready to attack anyone attempting to flee. Greg explained that he had found a few small gaps that could potentially be used to escape, but someone would need to distract the dog. Otherwise, any attempt would be futile. After hearing Greg's explanation, Lindsay, Sean, and Ryder realized that their only chance of escaping alive was to work together and come up with a solid plan. They began discussing strategies, weighing every possible option to escape without getting caught. But the problem wasn't just the guard dog. There was also a CCTV camera mounted in the corner, watching their every move. Someone was clearly monitoring them from the control room, meaning they had to be extremely careful. As they planned how to distract the dog and avoid detection, Greg mentioned that he had overheard the guards talking earlier. From those conversations, he discovered the horrifying truth behind the countless CCTV cameras. The group running the festival was actually a criminal organization with a disturbing goal to produce real-life snuff films, videos capturing actual acts of violence and torture. These recordings were stored on videotapes and sold to certain people who derived pleasure from such brutality. Lindsay, Sean, and Ryder were horrified as they finally realized that the man they had seen strapped to the electric chair wasn't an actor performing a scene. It was a real person being tortured and recorded by the sadistic organizers of the festival. The same fate had befallen the woman they'd seen earlier, brutally tortured while cameras rolled. Every act of cruelty in this place was committed to create horrific footage, mass-produced and sold as twisted entertainment for a depraved audience. After understanding the full extent of the cruelty and the true purpose behind the evil organization, Greg came up with a clever plan that he shared with Lindsay, Sean, and Ryder. He needed someone to help distract the guard dog. Greg asked if any of them had leftover food in their cells that could be used. It turned out Ryder had a piece of bread that could be used to lure the dog's attention. Holding the bread, Ryder was assigned to attract the dog toward her cell. Once the dog was close enough, she would have to quickly grab its chain collar and tie it to the metal bars, restraining it so Greg could unlock the prison door without interference. Meanwhile, Lindsay and Sean were tasked with keeping watch and ensuring no guards approached. But before they could carry out the plan, a large man entered the room.
Coming.
Without hesitation, he violently dragged Sean out of his cell and took him away. Lindsay, Ryder, and Greg could do nothing but watch helplessly as Sean was taken. The man's intention was horrifying. He planned to torture Sean and turn it into a live spectacle for the festival's audience.
Help me! Please help me!
Once the man left with Sean, the remaining three realized time was running out. They immediately put their plan into action. Ryder approached the guard dog, waving the piece of bread to get its attention. As the dog focused on the food, she quickly grabbed the chain around its neck and tied it tightly to the metal bars, ensuring it couldn't attack Greg while he worked on unlocking the prison door. After a few tense moments, Greg finally succeeded in breaking the lock and freeing them. Without wasting a second, he smashed the only CCTV camera watching the area so they could no longer be monitored. Greg knew that destroying the camera would likely alert the guards, so he braced himself for what was coming. Sure enough, moments later, a guard appeared to check on the damaged camera. Greg confronted him head-on, fighting with all his strength, but the guard was much bigger and stronger. Struggling desperately, Greg managed to snatch the keys hanging from the guard's belt. Though he was nearly overpowered, he threw the keys toward Lindsay before the guard could stop him. Lindsay quickly used the keys Greg had retrieved to unlock her cell. Once free, she hurried to open Ryder's cell, as Ryder was still occupied restraining the dog. After both women escaped, they joined Greg in fighting the guard. Working together, they finally managed to overpower him, giving them a brief window to continue their escape. However, amid the chaos, the dog's chain broke, setting the animal loose. The furious dog lunged at Greg, who was at the back of the group. Lindsay and Ryder could only watch in horror and sorrow as Greg, who had helped them so much, was savagely attacked and killed by the beast, sacrificing his life in their attempt to escape. With no time left to grieve, Lindsay and Ryder continued their escape, leaving behind Greg's lifeless body. As they fled through the dark corridors, they stumbled upon a room used for producing videotapes, each one meant to be distributed later as part of the twisted operation. They moved cautiously, trying to avoid being caught again by the syndicate. While searching for an exit, they entered the control room. On one of the monitors, they were horrified to see Sean being brutally tortured. The tension escalated when the phone in the room suddenly rang. Startled, Lindsay and Ryder quickly hid as a man entered to answer the call. During his conversation, the man received news that 2 prisoners had escaped. Panic spread among the group as the syndicate launched an all-out search. Guards began sweeping every corner of the facility, determined to capture Lindsay and Ryder before they could escape. If the 2 managed to get away, it would expose everything and jeopardize the continuation of their dark festival. Realizing how dangerous their situation had become, Lindsay and Ryder knew they had to move fast. Every second counted. Their desperate attempt to escape was filled with close calls as they were chased by relentless members of the group. While hiding from the same large man who had pursued them earlier, they accidentally discovered Lance, barely alive and covered in burns after being tortured in the electric chair. Ryder, overwhelmed with grief and love, ran to him and held him tightly. But before they could react, the large man appeared again and pulled the lever, sending a deadly surge of electricity through the room. In an instant, both Ryder and Lance were killed in a gruesome scene. Powerless to save them, Lindsay fled in terror, with the large man chasing her relentlessly. Eventually, she became cornered, with nowhere left to run. As he raised his hammer to strike, Lindsay slipped and fell into a drainage tunnel. To her horror, the tunnel was filled with countless human corpses, the victims of the syndicate's atrocities. Trembling and nauseated, she ran through the piles of bodies, desperately searching for a way out. After what felt like an eternity, she saw a truck passing above. Summoning the last of her strength, she called for help, and the driver turned out to be John, the same man who had rescued her at the beginning of the story. Seeing Lindsay covered in blood, John quickly took her to a doctor for medical treatment. There, she met Dr. Tomey, who treated her wounds with apparent care. During her recovery, Dr. Tomey told Lindsay she was incredibly lucky to have survived when so many others hadn't. His words brought her a fleeting sense of relief, but that comfort didn't last long. Over time, Lindsay began noticing strange behavior from both Dr. Tomey and John. Her instincts were right. They were not saviors at all. In a horrifying twist, Lindsay discovered that Dr. Tomey and John were part of the same evil organization. They had pretended to be her rescuers to deceive her. Now, Lindsay had to face the devastating truth. She would never escape. She was destined to become the next victim, tortured for the amusement of the festival's unsuspecting audience who believed they were merely watching a performance. With the grim realization of her fate, Lindsay understood there was no way out. All hope was gone, and her story, like those before her, would end in pain and darkness. And with that, the story comes to a chilling close.